dominated by Labor and the Greens, come out in support of the government in a way which I think has been disrespectful to the thousands of people who have actually taken the time to make submissions and to put forward their own experiences under the Firearms Act of 2024. We know that the committee has shown and been accepted that the implementation of the Act Australian firearm owners not working, but that in itself is only a minor part of the flaws in this legislation. We know that there are many discretionary powers given to the Police Commissioner that the committee report upon, and yet they make no judgment about those other than to say that they feel that they're justified. They say that they're not talking about policy and then they delve into policy. It also is apparent that the system requiring the mental health checks which GPs have been charged with undergoing is causing a great deal of concern in the community. Western Australia has the lowest number of GPs per 100,000 of any people of any state in Australia. And in regional and remote areas, that shortage is even more acute. To ask those overworked GPs to then devote their time to undertaking a task which is not required in any other jurisdiction in a way which has not been clear, with consequences which they fear may come back in the future to affect them professionally, despite assurances that there's no legal liability attached to GPs undertaking this. I know from discussions with the College of General Practitioners and general practitioners in my electorate that they are deeply concerned about being asked to undertake these tests, these checks, and to give that assertion going forward. So I do welcome the fact that the medical roundtable has been asked to be reconvened. That's something which we do welcome. I do welcome the acknowledgement that sporting clubs have been targeted and that they have to have some assistance going forward to actually be able to provide the place where communities can come together and enjoy the sport that is ballistic sports, shooting of whether it be clay targets, rifle shooting, pistol shooting or the like. Communities across Western Australia have been denied that by police actions which have seen their clubs and facilities being considered not fit for purpose and shut down. Something which I think is part of a deliberate attempt to drive people away from owning firearms in Western Australia, part of a government which has an arbitrary approach towards firearm ownership rather than one which is based upon need and based upon a lawful reason to hold a firearm. It's been, I think, an exercise in political point making by the government since the introduction of legislation. We know this legislation was contemplated as far back as 2014. In fact, the Nationals were in there calling for the Law Reform Commission to undertake the work that was taken. That forms the basis of much of what's in here. Where it's gone wrong is where the Labor government has chosen for its own political advantage to change those recommendations and to insert its own criteria in here in an attempt to win votes, create public concern around lawful, law-abiding firearm owners and use them as political football in the 2025 election. Now, I have with me today my colleagues in the National Party, also got representatives from those industry groups within the firearms owning community and also the Farmers Federation. I might step aside for a moment and allow Steve Maguire from West Australian Farmers to have a say about their reaction to today's report, and then we might hear from the industry, and then we're willing to take questions if you like.
Thank you, Shane. Yes, Steve Maguire, I'm President of WA Farmers. So this legislation was ran through the Parliament without due process. There was little meaningful consultation, and despite the government's pretext of bringing it in, there's very little evidence that this will make the community safer. All it's done is impose a lot of red tape onto law-abiding gun owners. Now, the committee did find that the legislation is difficult to navigate. There's over 500 pages in the Act and in the regulations. It also noticed that the portal was not ready and that there was insufficient information because the government pushed an unrealistic timeline onto the police to get this done. With the mental health checks, they've pushed it back to a working group, but we still think that it's not correct to place this responsibility on the GPs, and WA Farmers did put in our submission that there is probably a better community-based system to identify mental health issues that would work a lot better. We have spent many years trying to get men and farmers especially to seek mental health help. If going and seeking that help puts their ownership of guns at risk, that is going to be counterproductive. We have said this over and over again, and the committee has not really addressed this issue. There is the regulatory burden placed on producers, on agricultural producers, is high, and it is difficult to navigate all the bureaucracy of this system. Now, in the report, there is a lot of power given to the Commissioner. They've noted, they've called what's called the Henry VIII term about 60 times. While that's a bad thing possibly, it's also a good thing in that with good consultation, we are hoping that the Commissioner will be able to fix up a lot of the mess that's been created. The police have already acted and changed a lot within their scope, so we're hoping that will continue. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, questions. Sorry, I'm a bit deaf, I'm a farmer.
So taking guns off people won't make the community any safer. Do you think that
Well, no, but police already had the opportunity to remove guns from people before. We saw with the Florette shootings that they were asked 6 times. They didn't act under the old legislation. The problem wasn't the laws of the legislation, it was how the legislation was being used and what the police were doing. That actually hasn't changed. I mean, it's not really... the police have always had the right to remove some guns. It has probably clarified it, but a lot of the time these shootings happen by people who have not identified as mental health issues or do not have a criminal background. It is so there's actually no hard evidence. You could say that might be you would think that would make things safer, but where's the hard evidence from another jurisdiction or whoever has gone down this road to say this will actually create a safer community? They keep on trotting that out.
So the government has said that the rollout wasn't great, but says that it's essentially IT issues, that the portal's now working, that 50,000 gun owners have got their
the government has
processing. Got their applications processing. In your view, is it now working?
It's getting better, but that's from a very, very, very low point. They've said it's been working the whole time, and it hasn't been. It is definitely getting better. They've doubled the amount of staff working on the portal from like 60 to 125. There's an enormous amount of resources being put into it. My assessment was it actually wasn't feasibly possible to do what they tried to do, to try and shift 80,000 licence holders over onto our electronic portal, even if it was fit for purpose, was a big ask in 1 year. And there's no way the portal was fit for purpose.
The government now essentially say that they'll keep working to improve any issues with the portal, but that they claim that the laws themselves are fundamentally sound, and have said that this report should be cause for the entire public, gun owners included, to unify around that. Will you now back in the laws themselves?
There were some concerns of legislation, but not huge. Most of the issues are in the regulations, and hopefully we can make some changes there. Unfortunately, this committee did not dig too deep into the regulations, and there's a lot of things that could be changed there. But as I said, the Police Commissioner has a lot of power, probably too much power, but that also gives him the power to make some of the changes. So we're in a committee with the government and advising them, and there's definitely been a strong will in the police to try and fix this. But I think they were given a poison chalice, but a lot of that is a mistake of their own making.
So you blame Pat?
Definitely, absolutely. The previous minister, when you're going to consultation and just being shouted at, when you try and make a point, that is not meaningful consultation.
What about the new minister?
The new minister's a lot better, but he's still protecting the government.
And on the question of whether these laws have made the community any safer, in Victims Advocates' words just now, they essentially said that a little bit of inconvenience for law-abiding gun owners is a price worth paying if it saves one life.
Well, it's a lot of inconvenience for a start. Absolutely, we all want a safer community, but where's the evidence that'll actually achieve that? Actual evidence, not feels or how good it feels or ideas. Where's the actual evidence?
But when you say, looking for evidence from another other jurisdiction,
Possibly.
someone's got to go first, don't they? Shouldn't WA go first?
Well, then you go, not necessarily. We've got to get it right. Another point I will make is rest of Australia, because I travel over east and talk to other farming groups, rest of Australia is watching this very closely. And I made the point, I had a meeting with the Commissioner 2 months ago, that unfortunately this debacle is possibly setting back national gun laws around Australia, because every other state has now been given ammunition to say, don't do what WA did, they made a complete mess of it, which has been made a complete mess of it. And so unfortunately, this is possibly holding back national uniform gun laws because they tried to ram it through and rush it through.
So do you think it's actually fueled the anti-gun law sentiment?
Well, not necessarily anti is a bit hard.
Yeah.
It is probably people are going to be a lot more cautious. I mean, and what I want to see is our police really document what they've done so they can go to other police and other jurisdictions and say, well, we mucked this up, we mucked that up, we mucked this up. You actually need to listen to the people when you do your consultation. Have meaningful consultation, proper consultation, and actually listen to what people are saying. Because the thing is, the gun laws are extremely complex. There's 500 pages in this. It is really hard to get it right.
And on the specific recommendations, I mean, they sort of said that there was, little information on the police website. They've brought the police to put together a handbook to get it out to every single.
Well, just at that point, the handbook was a recommendation of WA Farmers, our submission. We recommended they put together a handbook, give it to us first, so we can make sure that it actually has clear language, that it isn't contradictory, because this is a lot of the problem. Is when they've brought in so many new people into the portal to manage it, that when you're ringing people up, you're getting different contradictory information. So, yeah. Any more questions?
The minister said that he actually thinks that the rest of the country will follow WA and its gun laws. What do you make of that?
Oh, they will, but very, very cautiously, I'd say. Yes. They will hopefully they'll learn a lot from what we've been through.
Shane, just to clarify your position, if you can. So, because obviously there's a Liberal MP, on this committee, but are you and the Nationals rejecting the findings of this report?
Well, I do appreciate, Jess, that there's a number of findings which are actually by the majority, the two Labor and the Green, I would assume, and the two non-Labor and Green people in minority have disagreed on a number of those.
The minority report. So by and
that's
large,
not something.
that report has
My
been
understanding,
prepared
and I'm not a member of the Legislative Council, is that in the Legislative Assembly that's actually what happens, but in Legislative Council there's not a minority report as such often. It's more that there are reports within the report of where there's a disagreement.
Speak up against the report just now. They were standing right next to the committee chair, backing in the report that the government says has vindicated.
Well, that's part of the system that we have. It's once you're in the committee, there are expectations on committee members around allowing the chair to have the say. It would appear to me, well, as I say, I'm not in the committee, so I can't speak about that. But what I can say is that within the body of the report, there are a number of issues from which there was a difference of view from the minority, which I assume is the two non-Labor and Green members in that report.
So does the opposition, as a collective, then now have a position in relation to?
This has been something which the Nationals have been taking the lead on right from the start, and there has been differences of view between the two parties. I think as we go forward from here, you'll see a collective view from the opposition on a lot of these matters as we wait a response from the government to the findings in here. But I'd also say to the people of Western Australia, if you're continuing to have problems and concerns, do not hesitate to let the Police Minister directly know of those issues so that the government is aware. Because what I found most disappointing of today's outcomes was that we had a committee chair who was referring to the over 2,600 people who didn't support who weren't supportive of the legislation as somehow being misguided. I think the word was supposition, and so If you don't agree with the government, you're misguided. If you agree with the government, you're good. That's actually disrespectful to those people, and I've heard on the Country Out a little while ago the Kimberley Pilbara Cattle Association coming out and talking about the fact that their pastoralists have been highlighting the issues they've been having under this legislation has been brushed under the carpet. It does seem to me that this is a report which is a missed opportunity to really examine what could have been done to undo some of the overreach which I think the West Australian Government has engaged in the development of this legislation. And it's been out there with the Minister, I know, and when this was being debated in Parliament, was rushed through on the basis of a domestic violence being at the core of the legislation. This legislation was actually started to be developed in 2022. It actually was in the Parliament being discussed in 2024 and then rushed through with only 11 of the well over 400 clauses being properly debated in the chamber. And I'm absolutely of the view that the committee should have looked at the appropriateness of those decisions at that time and also made a call on whether or not the amendments which opposition and other members, crossbench members, had on the books, many amendments to the legislation which were never examined, would have made a difference in actually making a more fit-for-purpose piece of legislation. Well, this is now the law. The government has the majority in the Parliament. The Legislative Council Committee has come out with a wishy-washy finding. There are a few things in here which we need to make sure happen. We need to make sure that there are changes around those health checks because, as Steve has said from the Farmers Federation, we know that it's notoriously difficult getting a lot of, especially regional people, to get to the doctor and to seek help, and this is perversely something which could actually lead to poorer health outcomes rather than better health outcomes. We know that the situation for sporting clubs has been dire because they've been shut down one by one, and I welcome the fact that their recommendation is that they be eligible for some funding to get back up and running. But that can't come at the expense of every other club in Western Australia. The government has to put some money to this and ensure that people who are enjoying their sport, their recreation at a legitimate recreation at a gun club can continue to do that. And one of the other matters which I think we need to make sure is we address the situation for junior competition at those gun clubs going forward. They know also that there's been problems in recent days just in terms of getting some young people to compete with pistols in Canberra, which my office had to personally intervene in to try to get some sense into the situation so those young people could go over there and compete in their chosen sport. And we know that people in remote areas have had an awful lot of trouble trying to negotiate their way through this, and people who rely upon firearms as part of their tools in trade who have been denied firearms because of some historic offence that they've committed, or even in one pastoral's case who was quite well publicised recently as a result of a traffic accident, that they can't actually have a firearm on the property. The situation is quite ridiculous and that needs to be looked at again. So I just say to people, it's disappointing that this has happened. We will continue to work towards a more sensible outcomes for West Australian firearm owners and working with groups like WA Farmers, like the firearm dealers and others, that we'll be able to ensure that at least there's a voice for them at the table and hopefully get some sort of sense out of the current situation.
Shane, just on, you mentioned the timing of the DB amendments after Florida. Can I just ask you, about that and the government today leaning on, or hearing with victims advocates and Ariel Bombara. Again, do you believe they're using that as a shield against backlash to these laws?
Look, first of all, what happened in Florida was a tragedy. It could have been avoided under the existing legislation at that stage, and there was a report done on the actions of police in that regard, and I think it found 8 officers had failed to use the law as it stood to protect the community in that circumstance. I attended the memorial service at Floreat, and it's a very distressing situation. The government, I believe, has shamelessly used that situation for its own purposes. As I said, that legislation was already in the House. There was an amendment around domestic violence, which did not then mean that it had to be rushed through the other chamber in a way that it wasn't properly interrogated. There was actually already, I think, an understanding from police and others that they had the powers, they should have used the powers. I don't think public safety was enhanced by rushing the legislation through in the way that it was, with an agreement that only X amount of hours would be available for discussion on what is a very complex piece of legislation. Some bills come to the House, they might be 5 clauses long. This was one that was nearly 500. Look, I'm not going to delve into that. The actions of government are what I'm critiquing, not what the individuals have said. I understand her distress, and the situation is one that's very painful for everybody. And I'm not going to make it a sort of political point in any form, but I think the government probably has strayed into that area.
Can we speak to someone?
Yes.
Can I just make a quick statement?
Yeah, you want that?
Yeah. Can I ask a question for the members of Parliament, not just the Nationals and members of the media? Why weren't we doing this a year ago? Surely the proper process of Parliament is that we have draft regulations, the Legislative Committee looks at those regulations, and then they're changed before they are proclaimed. And then we don't have to put up with the mess that we've got. That's my question, is why were we not doing this a year ago? And that is a question, I think, for the Premier and the Minister. Right. I'll sneak over here.
Yep.
Bevan Steele is my name. I'm the president of the WA Firearms Traders Association. I'm representing the Firearms Community Alliance here today. This report that we've seen handed down today was expected by us. We're not expecting great things from the government, to be honest with you. This is rushed legislation. It's led to a formalisation of a review under protest from the government. And on that note, we'd like to thank members of the National Party, members of the opposition in the Liberal Party in the upper house, who saw fit to see through the charade of public safety, which we're well aware of. We advocate for public safety in the arena of what we're doing, but a lot of the regulations, a lot of the act is mission crept away from the intent of government, no doubt, into the arena where the legislation's become so clunky that it doesn't work. Like Mr Love said, it's not fit for purpose. That's been demonstrated by the multitude of people that have submitted into the review, taken time out of their daily lives to put into a review, suggestions, and the review's kind of glazed over a lot of those, rather insultingly. Like I said, it's disappointing to see some of the results out of it and the way it's been handed down.
One of the findings was the review committee kind of brushed aside concerns in the hunting space and sport shooting space, that the concerns raised with them were unfounded. What do you make of that?
Yeah, for sure. Look, it's hard for the review panel. Again, our deepest sympathies with them. Not only was this legislation rushed through, so was the review process. They had something like 4 months total, don't quote me on that, right, but I think it was about 4 months, to get together a piece of legislation that was rushed through Parliament with no external debate to try and extrapolate not only who is giving them the information, what the information is correct, but the intent of government at the time. So I think they've downplayed a lot of the effect of that side of the nature of firearms and firearms use out there in the community. They seem to have focused largely on the victims of firearms, the incorrect firearms use and things like that, not the day-to-day. Firearms use before this legislation kicked in was 90,000 people all over the state, with every background, every background feasible, every cultural background, every financial background. The firearms users, by and large, we're not a big issue in the state of Western Australia, and that can be seen through any crime stats that you look at. They're very low. Look, the legislation already was in existence. the legislation was already in existence for the last 50 years. Legislation exists to catch criminals and punish them in the judiciary.
But this legislation will capture more.
This legislation has unwillingly captured victims of the narrative. So when the smoke and mirrors is pulled back, we've got people that are being recaptured for petty crimes that they've committed. They've gone to the courthouses, they've been dealt with by the judiciary, and 8 years later they're getting smacked on the wrist for something like a simple damage offence. We're seeing people that are using the domestic violence situation to have firearms removed from them when there's no domestic violence. For periods of time they can't get them back. We're seeing people with children that are reporting mental illness, or I've gone to school, Dad, I didn't feel well, I've told the school counsellor, Dad's a professional roof shooter, he's had his firearms taken away from him. Now no opportunity to present it. So when I say mission creep, this is the mission creep that we have to be careful in legislation to make sure that we do get the bad guys. Industry wants the bad guys gone, we don't want them, and they're not typically part of our industry, by the way, I might say. They acquire their firearms much the same way as drug dealers acquire their drugs. They don't get them from the local chemist. So we don't want those people here with us in our mix. We want them gone, but we also don't want the mission creep to capture the right people with the right intent, good intent, that are unwillingly caught in the net.
What about the argument better safe than sorry?
I could say that about cars and driving on the road. You know, again, like I said, our industry is very responsible. We know what we're dealing with. They are firearms, and again, I heard the victims, unfortunately, of the domestic violence saying, "Yep, take every firearm out of the house." We don't hear the same rhetoric with knives that are in the house that kill more people than firearms every year.
But Ariel Butler did make the point you can run away from them if you can't be away.
To a certain degree, you can. To a certain degree, you can run away from a gun as well. You know, it's one of these things. I think we have to be mature and responsible in the approach, and what we've seen is not a mature and responsible approach. When you're seeing legislation rush through, when you're seeing bits of debate not debating, 11 out of 400 and something clauses not debated, that's cause for concern. And again, you know, if it wasn't for the opposition and members like the Nationals that actually wanted to sit down and look at it in an educated manner, you know, we'd be in a lot worse a place.
From a trader's perspective, how does viability sit with the laws and regulations as they stand now? And you know, like, are there any businesses?
The industry's on its knees. It's a bit bigger than the industry, but at the moment the industry's on its knees. We are struggling. We firearms owners, by and large, because of the lack of information, have flooded to shops. So we've been providing a quasi-government service on behalf of the government to try and navigate people through the system, because people aren't computer literate. Much you know, new news to the government. They're not computer literate. They don't necessarily possess the skills to navigate these complex systems that they've put in place.
And actually, last question. Maybe
Just your response to the findings.
Yeah, Murray Cornish. I'm Vice President of the West Australian Clay Target Association. I've been at this for 3 years, trying to consult and get some sort of sense out of all it's got to do, is because we have got 1,200 members in the state that are law-abiding. We're Olympic sport, so we go to the Olympics, we do everything right, and we've got more conditions than you would do than if you were walking down the street. You do not move unless you are being taught or controlled or whatever, and that's international, whatever it is. But juniors, sharing of firearms, there's a whole list of things that aren't relative to public safety. And if you look at it in the long term, public safety, it's not going to, whether I can borrow Shane's gun at a club or I can borrow Lockie's gun, whoever, when mine breaks down, and to put that in there to say, well, that's against public safety. How it is, we're both registered to have the same firearm, the same club support, and yet we've been sort of penalised to what we can do at a club level.
Are these laws seeing a reduction of people entering the sport?
Membership has gone up purely not because people want to, but because in the legislation is that you have to shoot 6 times a year to maintain your club support. So people are going to clubs and flocking to clubs to keep the 6 shoots a year just so they can keep their firearm, and that's the only reason they're coming to the club, because they're not. Only other reason is that's it. They just want to come to keep their guns.
And they've still got one.
And they're still gone.
A club, that is.
Yeah. So clubs are probably the worst in the regulations is the club bureaucracy as far as paperwork, reporting. It's just over the top. You know, like people in our clubs are all volunteers. We don't get paid to sit in an office and shuffle paper from one piece to the other. But you know, we've got a report on this, keep track of everybody. Basically, keeping track of just so that if criminals come in, then they know where they are. But people don't last long in our sport that are unfit for competition.
All right, very good. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. Which is your one?